The Citizen Mike Show. News. Commentary. Interviews. Citizen Mike Show starts now.
Welcome to the Citizen Mike Show. Thanks for tuning in. We do appreciate it. My name is Mike Berdinsky. This is the fall season opener, the episode 4, October 11, 2018. On my right, the one and only internationally acclaimed Ralph Tomaselli, editor of the Record Journal. Yeah, internationally acclaimed.
Yeah, no.
We say that all the time.
Canada.
Because my wife's
in Canada.
Exactly, cross borders. Special guest in the studio tonight, Oz Griebel, the unaffiliated gubernatorial candidate running for governor of the state of Connecticut. Oz, thanks for coming down to WPAA and being on the Citizen Mike Show.
I'm delighted to be here with both of you.
As is our tradition, we are going to introduce you to our viewers by reading a bit from your resume that I find on your website. We're not going to include everything because it's only an hour show.
Please don't.
We'll try to hit the highlights.
Put us all to sleep.
It says that you led the Metro Hartford Alliance, Hartford's largest organization for business leaders, for 17 years.
Correct.
Goes on to say you've served on a lot of boards, nonprofits and profits. I want to list some of them.
Sure.
Because for some viewers and for me, it may be a contrast between your background and others. So let's see what we got. Served on the boards of the Annual Fund of the United Way of the Central Naugatuck Valley, Bradley International Airport, the Connecticut Business and Industry Association, the Connecticut Transportation Strategy Board, Junior Achievement of Central Connecticut. I'm going to take a breath. The Mark Twain House, Northwest Catholic High School, Riverfront Recapture, University of Hartford, the Wadsworth Athenaeum, the Waterbury Foundation, and Yale New Haven Hospital. You, at one point, were a teacher. You graduated from Dartmouth, I think I saw.
Correct.
Were engaged in sports, and you got a law degree from Suffolk University. Right. Did I miss anything material that you want to add in?
Well, there are two. You had on the for-profit side. I was on. I am on the board of something called World Business Capital, which is a privately held entity up in Hartford.
The Metro Hartford Alliance. That's in the papers a lot, but I'm not sure it's widely understood.
Sure.
What is it? And tell us why your background with that organization makes you a great candidate for governor.
Well, that and I would also, and you didn't touch on this, but I worked for a bank, First National Bank of Boston, for 22 years. When I was transferred down here in 1993 from Boston, it was to be president of Bank of Boston, Connecticut. So before I went to the Alliance, I was there for 6 years. I also served for 2 years at McDermott Corporation, a specialty chemicals company in Waterbury, as their chief operating officer and a member of that board of directors, and then went to the Alliance in 2001. The Alliance is what is referred to in the vernacular as an economic development organization. It serves north central Connecticut, so think of everything really from here north. Wallingford, not necessarily businesses in it, but everything from Cromwell north is probably the better way to think of it, as well as out to all the towns in the eastern part of the state up through Mansfield and then on the Farmington Valley towns. The mission of the organization was to see that region competes, and that's the word we emphasize, that region competed aggressively and successfully for jobs, for capital, and talent. So the whole notion of dealing with the legislature, dealing with city government, to create an environment where we could retain the jobs we have and, more importantly, grow jobs in that, so it would benefit the entire region. So over 17 years, we did things in the city. For example, we created a business improvement district, which required bringing a lot of people together to self-tax themselves for that district. We worked on recruiting, helping to recruit Northwest Airlines that was here for about 18, the Amsterdam flight that Northwest Airlines provided out of Bradley for about 18 months before the 07-08 international financial debacle. We worked with the airport authority to help recruit Aer Lingus, which is still providing service out of Bradley. We've worked on pulling together, we created something called the Insurance and Financial Services Cluster about 15 years ago to bring the insurers together to see how could we leverage the talent leverage those companies to make the sector, particularly in North Central Connecticut, ever stronger. We created something called the Connecticut Health Council along the same race. We created something called the Hartford Young Professionals and Entrepreneurs to focus on the younger folks in the area to make sure that they knew to give them a reason, the stickiness to stay here. So things like that are really all about how do you create an environment where we retain the jobs that we have and that we provide an environment where either current employers add other jobs and other people want to come here to start a business or grow a business.
Ralph?
It's clear he's been involved in a lot of what I would call quasi-government
Oh, absolutely.
experience.
Correct.
And I'm just wondering, in that role, was there something that you observed that prompted you to make this run, to decide to run for elected office?
Well, I ran in 2010 for the Republican nomination, and I thought long and hard about running as an independent then, and we can come back to that in a minute. But the reason I decided to run in 2010, I was very concerned about where the state was headed over that decade, and that some of the things we had done, if you go back to the Rowland administration, in the 99 to 2001 period, we were running surpluses in the aggregate of $5.5 billion. And when the constitutional amendment was passed to enable us to assess the personal income tax, surpluses were only under that amendment were only supposed to be used for servicing existing debt, funding pension funds, or funding the rainy day fund, unless the governor and 60% of the legislature declared a quote emergency, close quote. And then the money could be used for other things. And we took about $4 billion of that $5 billion over that period of time into what I would call operating costs. I mean, there were probably a lot of nice things done with it, parks built and whatnot, but that's not why when people they get the votes to pass the income tax. The idea was when you had surpluses, it would not be moved into, in effect, operating deficit. The other thing I'd say to you is you may recall Governor Rowland at the time authorized two $50 rebates. At the time he was running for election. I'm sure there might have been a few others, but I sent both of my checks back to him with a note saying this is not what the money's supposed to be used for. And he would refer to me when I'd see him after that, here's Oz Griebel, the man who doesn't need $50. At the same time, we took 15 cents out of the gasoline tax. And what I was concerned about is we were using surpluses for the wrong things. We were under-investing in one of our most important infrastructure assets, transportation broadly defined, and that we were headed in the wrong direction. And under Governor Rell, who's one of the nicest people ever, she walked away, in my opinion, from the private sector. So I was very concerned in 2010 about where the state was headed. And then you just fast forward to this. I obviously did not run in 2014, but as you think about what you want to do with the rest of your life. I've had a great run here in Connecticut for 25 years. And the notion that we are undermining this great state by having inappropriate public policies is what motivated me to do this again. And I really believe, that when I decided last August to do this, and I made the decision to leave the Alliance, I didn't make the decision to enhance my obituary. I made the decision because I was convinced that the state is ready for independent leadership. 2010, they weren't. As I said a second ago, I thought of running as an independent, came to the conclusion the state was not ready for it. 8 years later, the fiscal situation is worse. We've had out-migration. We've had a really kind of we're going in the wrong direction 8 years later. Nothing has really changed in the positive, in my opinion. And at the same time, I think the state is tired, sick and tired of partisan politics where leaders focus only on whether it says Republican or Democrat on your sweatshirt. They're only focused on primarily on re-election and not focused on Connecticut taxpayers, residents, and employers. And that's what this campaign is about.
Let's get to some specific issues that.
You really want to talk about specifics, Mike?
Yeah, we do. Yeah. We're gonna have some fun. One that I want to talk about is something that we've talked about on the show before, and that is tolls. As I understand your position, but
Right.
this is a check me if I go wrong kind of a question. You're in favor of a pilot project, and if that pilot project works out,
Right.
then all systems go. Then you're in,
Correct.
you're in for tolls. Is that a fair characterization?
It
of
is.
that?
I just want to say this one thing, Mike, and then
Yeah.
it's an accurate statement. There's no question about it. I
Yeah.
want to put it, though, in the context that the tolls have been, when I chaired the Transportation Strategy Board from '01 to '05 under Roland and Rel, that group, and I'll come back to that because it epitomizes how we're going to run our administration. But one of the recommendations we made was get electronic tolls back. Get tolls back, electronic tolls, not toll booths.
Yeah, right.
And as you know, the federal government.
Yeah.
When the tragedy occurred in the '80s and we took the toll booths down, federal government stepped in and made up the difference on the funding. So we have to get federal approval to put tolls back on. But the tolls are the tail wagging the transportation strategy dog. This is about priorities, regardless of where the money comes from. What are we going to spend it on? And one of the things that board focused on, and I'm a believer in, one of our major priorities, one of our major assets is our connection, our proximity to New York and Boston. That we ought to be able to get companies and people out of those two areas because I think our costs are. So the idea of getting that pilot on was to say the world's not coming to an end, but I want to emphasize it's about not just the tolls, it's how we spend the tolls.
Got it. But I want to get the mechanics
Sure,
of the tolls.
go ahead. Absolutely, go
because
ahead.
That's some people are in favor, some are not, and some people
Correct.
may have the wrong idea. So
Correct.
I want to stick there.
Sure.
But to help me get into that topic, I want to use some language from a column that Kevin Rennie wrote. He's a columnist for the
Right.
Hartford Courant. This
Yep.
comes out of the September 27 Hartford Courant. He's actually talking about budgets and other things,
Right.
but there is a relevant issue. Let me read that,
Sure.
and that's the segue. So, and this is the context. These are the days when you weren't allowed in the debates. Okay,
Yes,
this goes
Yes.
back. Yeah, all right.
The Russians were in charge.
That's right. So he starts this particular paragraph by saying that including you in the Wednesday's debate was the right decision, and he concludes. Kevin Rennie concludes this way. Also, he seemed more interested in answering the questions he was asked than the other two candidates who were busy checking the boxes on their list of talking points. Griebel was particularly fluent in the language of transportation, an issue that matters to many voters. It was encouraging to hear a candidate show some depth. We love depth on the Citizen Mike Show, and to help you get that depth, to help
Yes.
us, I want to refer to a column, a piece that appeared recently in the Record Journal, written by a local candidate. Actually, she's a Republican running out of primarily the Cheshire area,
Yep.
but with a sliver of Wallingford. And there's some factual assertions on there. I want to run them by you.
Sure.
If they're wrong, swat them aside.
Yep.
If they're right, let me know.
Sure.
All right, but they're rather specific. And she writes, first of all, tolls cannot be erected solely at the borders due to federal regulations.
Right.
Further, as a result of an agreement made years ago, Connecticut receives over $200 million a year in transportation funds from the federal government if we do not have tolls. She says, apparently we are in jeopardy of losing those funds the day the state starts to construct tolls. In addition, because we do not have tolls, the federal government has authorized Connecticut to charge a much higher gas tax than other states. Is she right? Is she wrong? What's your...
Well, she's right. Well, the first point was you can't do tolls at the borders.
Solely at the
That's true.
borders.
And you also, Lamont says, do them only in trucks. Rhode Island's doing that now. The lawsuit has come in. I don't see how you can, under the Interstate Commerce Clause, based on my understanding, I'm not a practicing lawyer anymore, but the idea that you could toll one segment of the vehicles and not others, I don't think is going to stand the test. Third, the point about the $200 million, that number, I'd want to have that number checked. But the point that she's making about the federal monies that would come in, you would have to do the analysis about what the trade-off is, but we would need approvals. And what I thought, usually what people say is that the threat is we'd have to pay the money back to the federal government.
That's not true.
That's not. But you would need, the point that I believe that we would have agreement on is we need federal authorization to get that back.
Even if you get federal authorization,
Right.
do we lose whether or not the number's 200 million or...
I've always assumed that you would lose that money, and the trade-off would be is the amount of tolls collected would offset that. I don't know what that number is. I have to go back and check that number.
Fair point.
But that's a fair point.
And then the gas tax.
I have never heard that the federal government has authorization on how much we charge for gasoline tax. That's I said earlier. Roland took 15 cents off. That's a tax that's assessed by the legislature, not by the federal. There's a federal gasoline tax in there,
right?
But the state gasoline tax is set by the state legislature.
So before we get to the budget, just sort of to button
Sure.
this particular topic up, does your campaign have some sort of a spreadsheet that shows, okay, this is the revenue from tolls if the
I don't,
pilot project
but
works?
DOT does. I mean, you may know that Malloy established an ad hoc group, and that all that was in that report.
Okay. Let's talk about the budget and finances and...
By the way, just a quick thing, Mike. The reason they're using that pilot that you mentioned
Sure.
is to actually test this.
Understood.
And so you'd have more than just a theoretical. I'm opposed to the Governor Malloy's $10 million study on tolls. That made no sense to me. But the idea of doing a pilot where you could play with congestion pricing and a number of other things. Tolls are there for two reasons: revenue, and also the way you establish the toll and toll rates and what rates you charge at certain hours have an impact on congestion. So it's not just the tolls for the revenue. We've got I-95 is a mess going from New Haven down to Stamford. You've got to look at other things than just the revenue source. That's all I'm saying.
Well, you mentioned the magic word and congestion
Correct.
tolling, which, as I understand, is an idea that if traffic gets heavier and you're in that zone that's being
Right.
tolled, you pay a higher rate. So
Right.
the rate floats, and you may not really know how much you're paying in tolls until that day is over.
Oh, no. You would have all that. You'd have all that laid out. I mean, I think the idea, you wouldn't try to say, hey, Mike.
That's the scare tactic, I'm telling you.
I know.
That's why I'm
you know,
raising
one of
it.
the things that's very troubling to me, and this is not just tolls, it's a number of other things. People latch on to sound bites or they latch on to fantasies, in my opinion. The idea that the governor is straightforward and candid and lays things out, to me, is a big part of what you do in every element. And so you'd lay all that out. And the other thing I want to add to the tolling and the congestion is we need to get the private sector at the table to say, particularly as you get closer down into Stamford and Greenwich and Lower Fairfield County, does everybody have to go to work at the same time? Does everybody have to come to work from 6 to 8? I mean, we've got to get people working at this in a whole different way than we have before.
Well, you mentioned the notion that stop looking at how we're raising the money and perhaps look at what you want to do with
Correct.
it. And I wonder if quickly you had
Sure.
a project or two in mind that's at the top of your list.
Well, there's several, and
Okay,
we
several's fine.
really have to. You're looking at some of the issues we have on the bridges that cross the rivers on Metro North town. I mean, those have to be. Some of these are 80, 90, 100-year-old bridges. The notion that they're just going to stay up in perpetuity without being maintained. I mean, if you believe that, I'll sell you one of those bridges. The other thing is you're not going to add another lane on I-95. So how are you going to address the congestion issues down there? I'll give you just a quick aside. I mean, one of the things about that Transportation Strategy Board, by having the private sector help shape priorities and funding, one of the ideas that came out of that, it was never implemented, I want to go back and look at it again, is the potential of taking the containers out of the Port Authority of New York and New Jersey and move them by barge into New London, New Haven, and Bridgeport, and get at least reduce the amount of truck traffic on I-95. It's those kinds of ideas. Other projects that we have to be dealt with is, keeping the Metro North cars up to speed, have Wi-Fi service on them. You're going to get 1 hour service from New Haven to New York? I don't think so in our lifetime. Look at the challenges New York is facing at Grand Central. But the idea of having a comfortable ride that's done in a reasonable period of time is important. You're looking at two major highway projects, highway repair issues on the interchange of I-84 and Route 8 in Waterbury. That's a 70, 80-year-old configuration that we're keeping together, probably spending $30 to $40 million a year just to keep the thing up. Does it ultimately need to be replaced? Yes, I think it does. Those of you who are familiar with the Hartford Viaduct that runs about 1.25 miles, 1.5 miles, that's also 60, 70 years old. We're spending probably close, if you've been to Hartford lately, over the last year, you've got that road is under constant repair, particularly during the summer and the early part of the fall and the good weather, and we're probably spending $40 million a year doing that and not taking advantage of it. We just went through probably 10 years to replace the Quinnipiac Bridge, the whole 95-91 interchange in New Haven. That took more time, probably took twice as long as was needed, in part because we didn't finance the project in its entirety. We chopped it off because it was easier to raise the cash in the short term. So having a comprehensive discussion about transportation, about projects, how we improve it, how we can reduce the congestion, to me is a big deal.
I just want to button up with a short
Sure, I
answer.
apologize,
The congestion toll concept
Yep.
versus I'm going to call it a flat fee.
Correct.
You're in favor of a congestion tolling system where the toll rate varies depending upon the traffic
Correct.
flow.
And that's why I want to do the pilot, Mike, because we'd have a chance to experiment with it. Instead of just yakking about it, and when I talk about the HOV lanes, I'm talking only about the HOV lanes, not all of 84 and 91 across the multiple lanes.
HOV.
High occupancy vehicle lanes. These were lanes that when that part of 84 and 91 were done, if you carpool, and I think we only need two people to be considered a carpool, you would, if you ever drive that way, you'll see the HOV lanes are frequently, because we all like our own cars,
Okay.
and we don't go. So it's using those to say, let's try this and see what would happen.
Let's talk about the budget. And there's so much, and a lot of complications, Ralph, but when you think of that issue in the state of Connecticut, what's your top concern about the budget and finances?
Well, I think that, and Oz mentioned this, is that this $4.6 billion
Right.
deficit that everybody seems aware of.
Right.
And I think at this point, most voters don't expect it to go away without some pain, taxes, cuts in spending.
Right.
But yet, we didn't seem to get that from Governor Malloy, and we're not getting real answers from the other two candidates,
Right.
I don't think. So I was hoping you could be specific about how you could close that deficit.
Sure, and I'll just put a plug in. Anybody, any of your viewers, anybody who wants to go to our website, osforgovct.com, that we've laid out a lot of this, and let me stay at the treetops level, and then you drive me in whatever direction you want. We didn't get into this fiscal mess in 10 minutes, and we're not going to get out of it in 10 minutes. We're not even, this first biennium budget that we'll start putting together on November 7th, that we submit in February, that we're going to work like the Dickens with the legislature to get passed, by early May. So we're not postponing budgets, decisions until October and hammering municipalities. Two or three things that I want to say, that every decision we make, and the budget being at the top of them in the near term, it will be the primary criteria will be, will it enhance Connecticut's ability to increase on a net basis 200,000 private sector jobs in this state over the next 10 years. We've had no net job growth in 30, so without job growth, without more people paying taxes, we've done what we've done, which is have more taxes at higher rates, which has led to the underinvestment in transportation, even with the higher rates, underinvestment in transportation and education, and the outmigration of people of all income levels and all ages. So everything we do, we've got to look at this budget, not just in the biennium budget. We've got to look at the next 2 or 3 budgets after it. And what kinds of structural changes can we start in this first biennium budget? And I'm happy to come back to that. But in this near term, what you said a second ago, our mantra is that we will put a budget together and take the actions that will cause the least amount of damage in these first 2 years. We will look to buy time. So how do you do that? I've said that we would look at bringing all the rainy day fund in, currently projected to be at about $2 billion at the end of this current fiscal year.
Isn't that a one-shot deal?
Just stay with me. It's absolutely a one-shot deal. Just stay with me in terms of the context. I'll also exacerbate that comment by saying we would look at things like postponing contributions to the state employee retirement fund and the state teacher retirement fund. Now, I recognize that that's counterintuitive to the unfunded liability issue we've got to look at. But what I'm concerned about, and this is going to need a lot of discussion, a lot of analysis, probably a lot of yelling and screaming at one another, is making sure that we don't do something either by raising taxes or creating a new tax, or by underfunding municipalities or agencies that are taking care of the most vulnerable among us, that do lasting damage to this economy, that really undermine the value of living in Connecticut. So to me, finding a way, and so now let's fast forward to the rainy day fund and the issue. So the CBAC agreement, all this is tied together. You know, everybody wants you to solve one problem, like tolls. You're for tolls or you're against tolls. Well, you're for tolls in a broader context, not for tolls for the sake of tolls. You're for tolls to fund the infrastructure that's needed to keep the economy alive and vibrant. The CBAC agreement, as you know, that Governor Rowland, why he ever did it, was originally a 15-year agreement. Governor Malloy extended it once to 2020 or 2019 and then extended it again to 2027. One of the arguments that he was making at the time, asking for organizations like the Alliance to support that extension, was that can come back de facto in 2020 when the unions negotiate. Each union negotiates for base compensation and work rules. So if you think about what I said about the rainy day fund and about the potential deferral, another quick digression. I'll be in a room with folks and I'll ask, is there anybody in the room a state employee retiree or state teacher retiree? If the answer is yes, I'll ask, are you getting your pension check? And of course I'm getting my pension check. My next question is, how confident are you you'll get it in 20 years? Some people will say they're entitled to it and others will say they're skeptical. And the point I want to make is that you have to be skeptical. You can't ignore Central Falls, Rhode Island, you can't ignore Detroit, Michigan, you can't ignore Stockton, California, and most importantly, you cannot ignore Puerto Rico. A state cannot file for bankruptcy today, but if you look at what Congress has done in enabling the Commonwealth to restructure some of their debt obligations and to restructure some of their pension obligations, we are at a danger right now of pitting retiree generations against 3-year-olds. So things we have talked about. Look, we'll strengthen the value of those funds by doing things like contributing to the lottery, looking at selling, putting all state-owned real estate, not the parks or open space, but state office buildings, rest stops along I-95, securitizing those and selling those and putting the proceeds from that sale into one of those funds, in exchange for which we want changes in work rules and we want changes in current benefit restructuring.
I want to pivot back to
Sure, I know you do.
question.
I know it's a long answer.
Well, then, no, that's okay. No, that's okay. But the first part of your answer was drain the rainy day fund.
Correct.
And
Well, yeah, I wouldn't use the word drain. Yes, I got it, okay.
Well, after
We go to zero, correct.
right, okay.
Correct, absolutely.
Yeah, you're going to go to zero. And I interrupt you and say, well, that's a one-shot deal. So
Sure.
your plan had better work by that third
Correct.
year.
Oh, absolutely.
So we got draining the rainy day fund, which is about $2 billion, I believe,
Right.
and you would
Just,
spread
no,
that.
if we found other things, Mike, I mean, if there was something else, I just want to say that the rainy day fund has
Yeah.
to be on the table. If we don't have to use all of it, great.
No, I get it.
Yep.
When you say defer the pension contributions, the problems with that, as raised by people that study this,
Sure.
is you can't do that with a teacher's
You got
pension.
an issue rate, right,
You got a legal issue.
right. Unless
Because
it's negotiated.
they're bondholders, as I understand the treasurer's office, bondholders, Wall Street basically
Yep.
exacted a promise
Yep.
from the state of Connecticut not to do exactly what you're suggesting.
Correct.
So, if you're elected, you
Right.
have a precious short time to
Correct.
get a hold of Wall Street,
Correct.
and the phone rings,
Yep.
and Wall Street says, "Are you serious?"
Well, are you
I'm
serious
not-
about the long term?
I'm not.
Are you serious about the long term?
I'll call your bluff.
Exactly.
No, hang up.
Exactly.
With respect to the employees' pension fund, you got to make the same call.
Correct, you do.
And you got to get their permission. And I can see labor saying,
Sure.
"Are you serious? We've given enough. We had a wage freeze.
know.
We had increased co-pays. You can trash CBEC all you want, but so aren't you living in the same kind of a parallel universe that other administrations have done?"
I think there are a couple of things you have to look at, and this is
Yeah.
why I say you have to look at it more than just this 2 years. The no layoff provision doesn't kick in. No layoffs can occur to 2021.
Yeah.
What I'm trying to say is you've got to look at this, not just in this biennium budget, but the next couple. If we have no net job growth in this state, Mike, I think we're headed for a cliff. And that's the point we're trying to make. Until we restore private sector confidence in this state, and what I mean by that is confidence by residents and confidence by employers. I seriously believe, that's why I'm advocating these kinds of things, I think you're headed for a cliff in 6 to 8 years. So it's kind of a pay me now, pay me later situation. And anybody will tell you, well, the state will always have to honor its pension obligations. I'm from Missouri. If you look at 12:01 a.m. on July 1st of next year, 40% of the budget's already committed to debt service, pension obligations, and state retiree fund, and that's up, and it will continue to go up. So if we're not willing to have, I recognize how hard these conversations. I want to be very clear. I am not under any illusion that what we're recommending is going to happen easily. And so what we've said is we're campaigning today to win on November 6th. The campaign to change some of the things that we're advocating that's in our plan, that starts on November 7th. And what I mean by that is just because we're elected governor and lieutenant governor doesn't mean that any of the things we're advocating are going to happen. You need the legislature to be part of that process, which I think has been, and the only way the legislature is going to respond, Mike, is by my coming out on a regular basis and meeting with voters in this state to say, this is why we're recommending this, and I need you to call the state senators and state reps to help this. This has got to be an ongoing campaign.
Well, as some of these commentators have said, a discussion around the table is not a plan. It's discussion.
Well, I put specific things out there,
and we're getting into them. At least I'm trying to. One of the things you talked about is the proceeds from the lottery.
Yep. The lottery as a whole, correct? Yes.
Yeah, 200-300 million. Is that
It's about 300 million. Yep.
per year?
Right, that's without sports betting, which ideally that would.
I'm going to get to that in a.
Yep.
Who loses if the money from the lottery is put into the general fund to
Correct.
balance the budget? Someone's not getting that.
But you're reducing the amount you have to contribute to the fund. So
Well-
the $1 billion you're contributing to the fund,
Where's the lottery money going now? I guess.
it's into the general fund.
Okay.
So you'd have to understand that you no longer had $300 million of revenue coming into the general fund, but you wouldn't have to fund the retirement at $1 billion. You'd have to fund it at $700 million. I mean, you have to do the math where what you're doing makes sense, and that's, as I've looked at it, that's what makes sense to me.
I want to come back to that, but Ralph mentioned pain.
Pain.
No cuts.
Well, that's what I'm saying, Mike, and I won't repeat it. We're trying to make steps that we put the least amount of pain in the next 2 years.
Right.
With the idea that we're making starting to lay the groundwork for structural changes going out. What I'm trying to demonstrate to people in the state and to employers, that we're prepared to make the significant structural changes. So pain, we've had municipal aid's been reduced for the last 4 or 5 budget cycles.
You'd protect that.
I would do everything. That's my point about the rainy day fund. What I'm trying to do is limit the amount of structural. You're trying to demonstrate to people that we're serious about making that change. If all we do is, if we go back and raise taxes right away to close part of that budget, it's going to send a horrific signal.
Yeah.
If we cut services dramatically, it's going to send a horrific signal. So the point we're trying to is try to use the rainy day fund, do some of the things I've talked about earlier to give us some time. Now, do I believe there are probably still going to be cuts to municipalities? Yes. But what I also want to put in the package is legislation that starts to move to incent the councils of governments particularly to have more regional delivery of municipal services. Let me take the city of Hartford for one example. Pilot payments are one of the biggest jokes in the state. Yeah. You've had constant reductions in pilot payments, right? So Hartford, the bailout of Hartford was absolutely the wrong thing to do. We had when I was at the Alliance, we had discussions about how to address that problem. So here's one idea. Governor Malloy took about 1 million square feet off the commercial tax rolls by buying 2 buildings, one on Constitution Plaza in Hartford and one that the Hartford had owned.
Okay.
Took those off to put state agents, to put state workers in them. And I said to him, why did you have to buy the buildings? And he said, well, aren't you happy there's more feet on the street in Hartford? I said, yes, but why do you need to own the building? 55% of all the property in Hartford is tax exempt. A bulk of that's owned by the state. So one of the things we would do is enter into sale leaseback agreements with commercial developers to own the building, put that building back on the commercial tax rolls, and at least you have a guaranteed income stream from those buildings rather than hoping and praying that the legislature is going to fund pilot. It's the same. Look at the joke that we had when the budget wasn't passed until October. Look at I don't know what Wallingford's situation is, but look at all the municipalities that by April or May have to lock their budgets in. Some of them have to go to referenda. And now all of a sudden you're going to, halfway through the year, you're going to say, oh, by the way, what we told you were going to get, you're not going to get. That's the kind of garbage that has to stop. And that's why we believe that only an independent governor can bring both parties together in the private sector to have serious discussions about these things.
Right.
I think municipal aid as I cover the news in the towns that we cover, I do think municipal aid can be cut. And I use examples like, Cheshire recently finished up a linear trail project. I think it was $2 million. Wallingford's going to get the better part of, I think, $500,000 to put another bridge on the linear trail. Southington got Southington, a very well-off
Right.
community, affluent community, got almost $3 million for a senior center. Okay, so I think there are projects in every town that are not needs, they're clearly wants, and then I don't think municipalities are ever going to have incentives to regionalize
Right.
unless you cut the amount of state aid that they're getting, which will force them to look a lot harder at their workforce. So that's just 2 points where I think municipalities can be cut more.
And the idea we have that's in the plan, and I've been on this kick for a while, I'm obviously not in favor of restoring county government. All that is another layer of government. But I do think our councils of governments are under-leveraged. And so the idea that we've had is that if I know the one with which I'm most familiar is the Council of Governments in the Hartford area, Capital Region Council of Governments, 39 towns. So if every one of those towns today is getting $100 in the current budget, the hypothetical, we'd say they'd each get 50 in our first budget. And the delta of 50 would go, times 39, would go to the COG. Every municipality has a vote on the COG. They could vote to just give me my $50 back and leave me alone. But the concept would be is that could be a financial incentive to start looking at how we can consolidate in a real basis. I mean, the old joke that had Columbus landed somewhere out in the Pacific, there'd be one state from Maine to Florida on the East Coast, and all those congregational churches would have landed out in Washington and Oregon, and they'd be the ones having this problem. So we've got to look at life a lot differently if we're serious about economic growth in the state.
So I just want to put in layman's language
Yeah.
here, all right? We're talking about savings resulting from, in a relatively quick period of time.
Not going to happen quickly.
Yeah, but
Not gonna happen.
But I was just following your assumptions,
Yep.
and after 2 years, the rainy day fund is drained. We've got some.
Right.
You can't put off the pension contributions forever.
Correct. Correct.
So I see some urgency there.
Sure.
But let me get to my point. You're talking about savings relatively quickly, in my opinion. But we're going to come back to you for the final word. With fire, police, Board of Education, good luck.
Right. Yep.
Education, Public Works.
Correct.
And so Wallingford under this plan, which I don't think is going to be politically palatable under any administration, would merge police departments hypothetically with Meriden. Really?
Well, no.
Oh, they would merge fire departments with Meriden and lay off, because regionalization only works if you lay people off.
Right.
So, and lay off, I don't know, how much can you save by laying off 10 cops?
Well, but I think-
Or 20 firemen. Isn't that the plan that regionalization assumes?
Sure, it's going to,
Yeah.
the idea is you're taking down the
Yeah.
cost of doing it.
I'm being the devil's advocate
No,
here,
but
obviously,
that-
but you've got to be the devil's
Correct.
advocate now before the election
Right.
rather than surprised later,
But aren't we saying,
Yeah.
though, that what we need are long-term structural reforms?
Well, I think we're saying we have a budget crisis. Oz opened up the discussion, and you did. We've got an immediate problem. A budget has to be put together real quick. And in 2019, by May, it has to be passed. And there's a $2 billion budget gap in that budget. So that has to be addressed. Answer, rainy day fund. The next year, 2.6 million is the deficit. Answer, defer pension payments.
Well, you have to do both of them, both years.
The mix,
right.
the mix
You
I
have
would
to do
leave to
the
the,
mix, right.
to the governor.
And I think I probably did frame the question that way.
Yeah.
But I think, now that I think it through,
Yeah.
I think what voters want
Yeah.
are more of these long-term structural solutions. Because I think the notion of rainy day funds and deferring pension contributions just sounds, and it's nothing.
I'm really going to be the devil's advocate here.
Good. It's
Voters want the long-term solution because there's no immediate pain. You can kick the can down the road for 10 years and say it's long-term.
Yeah, let me-
But the fact of the matter is, we have huge deficits coming up in the next
Right,
two.
you know, I wouldn't use the rainy day fund if I wasn't seeing that we're getting some movement
Right.
on other pieces of legislation.
Right.
I mean, the notion that we're not kicking the can down the road, and I'll repeat what I said said something a few minutes ago. You have to demonstrate to the populace that you're serious about these changes. What I'm trying to again repeat what I said earlier. I do not want to do damage to some of the things that are critical to the quality of life in this state. We've closed public parks, for example. Is that the right thing to do? Is that sending the right signal to residents and even employers who are trying to attract the best and the brightest to come to the state of Connecticut? The thing I really want to emphasize to both of you and to your viewers. This cannot be solved by the governor and the legislature alone. We need the private sector in this discussion. So I'm going to beat my dead horse on the Transportation Strategy Board.
What do you want from them?
Well, the Transportation Strategy Board, the beauty of that was that you not only had 5 commissioners, DOT, DECD, et cetera, OPM. This way that legislature was created, was passed, you divided the state into 5 segments, and each one of those 5 segments had 2 private sector people representing them. And there was that group that had 1 year to come up with a multimodal, multi-year strategy and the funding sources behind it. And it was that group that recommended the reinstitution of the gasoline tax, phased it into 3 cents a year. It recommended actually a surcharge for 10 years on the half-penny surcharge on the sales tax, and it recommended the establishment of tolls. The private sector needs to be part of these discussions, not just us. And remember, one of the things that's undermining, in my opinion, employment growth is the mill rate. I mean, for many businesses, particularly the smaller ones, the biggest tax that they pay is the property tax, the tax they pay on real estate and the tax they pay on equipment. If we don't change the way we're funding these things, I don't know what Wallingford's situation is, but I'd be willing to bet, based on what I know everybody else, is the mill rate has gone up over the last 10 years and services have probably gone down. I mean, we've got to change the model. And to the point about do people want something for nothing? No, I think if you're willing to demonstrate that yes, we're taking some short-term action here, not and trying to retain the power of the state, the great asset base we have, and we're laying the groundwork for structural change. I think people want that. And oh, by the way, on the rainy day fund, if you don't use it now under a deluge, when are you going to use it? When the sun comes out?
When it rains,
Well, I'd say it's raining.
It is raining.
I'd say it's raining. I'd say it's cats and dogs.
You can't argue with that.
I want to change the topic slightly. It's a compare and contrast question.
Yep.
Why is your approach to the budget and the deficits better than Ned Lamont's and Bob Stefanowski's? Why is yours better? What's wrong with their plan?
It's candid.
Maybe their plan
First
is
of all, it's
better.
candid. Well,
Tell me.
That's what the election's all about, right?
Right.
The election's about.
But what's your view?
I think the fact that you're going to solve this problem by staying on point, by reading from a script that says we're going to eliminate the personal income tax.
Stefanowski, you're talking about.
Yeah, I mean seriously. I mean, who believes that you can eliminate or significantly reduce the personal income tax in the near term? By the way, and I'm very clear on this, the personal income tax to me is the workhorse tax. All taxes are regressive. We always say, don't tax you, don't tax me, tax the fellow behind the tree. It's the least regressive because it's based on income. It's based on your income, my income. It's not based on the fact that the sales tax is flat no matter how much money each of us make, which is, to me, is regression. And oh, by the way, if you're going to cut the income tax, he has not yet said what's he going to replace it with, either in terms of other taxes. Remember, when we put the personal income tax in, I think we had the highest sales tax in the country at that time. I think it was over 8.5% back then. And so there was this whole balancing act of where we wanted to go. And so, as I said, if you believe that, I'll be happy to sell you a couple of bridges before I leave.
Let me stop you there
Sure.
and get Ralph in on this.
Yes.
So, Stefanowski, do you think the voters believe his? I mean, people that are going to vote for him anyway. Do you think they believe it?
Well,
are they being conned? Or
we know that since there was a segment of voters who believed that Mexico was going to pay for the president's border wall.
Okay.
I think there are people that will believe almost anything. And I think the chances of him eliminating the income tax are about the same as Mexico paying for the border wall. So,
Okay.
So there is that element, though, where that kind of grandiose, almost macho in some way, appeals to some voters.
It's intellectually dishonest.
Mike,
I'll go with that.
I'm not. I hope I didn't
it's just
come
nuts.
across like I'm glad that people believe that.
No, I know you didn't.
Oh,
no,
not at all. Because anybody that sat there and thought that Mexico was going to pay for a wall was incredibly intellectually
What led to my question with you
go ahead,
is Oz says no one in the state of Connecticut believes the Stefanowski claim, and I turn to you as
Okay,
our
no, people
expert on
believe
the
it.
street.
Yeah, I should have answered.
And to see,
yeah,
to see
people
what
believe
you,
it. Yeah, I didn't answer.
You think
the
some
question.
believe it?
Oh, I do think some believe it.
I
Or
think
people will say, because you hear this, at least he's going to try. I hear that 100. At least he's going to try.
Well, also too, isn't it the same? Not to keep, and I'm going to go quickly here.
Yeah.
But what you're doing is you're throwing a Molotov cocktail.
Yeah.
At the state of Connecticut.
Well, first, and the legislature would never go along with it. I mean, they just would never do it. So
Right, good.
it's nuts. The whole idea is absolutely nuts. And I want to move on
Right, good.
to,
Yes.
to what's the matter with
Yeah, go ahead.
So
Ned Lamont?
It's a
So
slightly different approach, but the property
Yeah.
restoring the property tax is going to solve this problem. Really, the property tax is a credit against your income tax. It does nothing to lower the mill rate. So this notion you're going to help the middle class homeowner with his or her property tax is nuts. And oh, by the way, where are you going to make up that money? His concept is we're going to reduce overtime in prisons or something. I mean, there's a little bit. What I said earlier. These are two candidates who are paying a lot of money to some professional people who say the best thing to do is stay on message. We'll poll test all this stuff, and we'll stay on message. And the difference between Monty Frank and me and those two tickets is you may not, and I'm welcome for the challenge. That's what this is all about.
Yeah.
But we're trying to say, look, let's at least have candid conversations and discussions about this. And I believe to the point, this electorate is hungry for this. I believe it to my core. They're tired of this partisan nonsense where you get pablum tossed at you, and I think their voters are ready to regurgitate the
So
pablum.
we're
I know,
run
I
short of time. So,
No, we're doing
that's
good.
okay. So I need a short answer to the next one.
Okay.
I need a short
All right,
answer
I'll do my
to
best.
a complicated
Yes.
question.
Yeah.
we have news coming out of the comptroller's office,
Right.
Kevin Limbo, and Daniel Malloy's office, that this year we're in the black. This year we're making money.
Right.
This year we're running a surplus.
Right.
And I think last year we did too.
That's why you get to the rainy day fund.
So if we're doing okay this year and there's a surplus this
Right.
year, why is it that we face a fiscal
You've got a
cliff
number
and
of
that
debt service obligations that are coming due. You've got some increases in compensation with workers in terms of the negotiation.
Yeah.
There are probably several other things that right off the top of my head, Mike, I'd have to go back and look at. But you know, the idea, it's a little bit like not recognizing that the economy doesn't go up linearly, and actions we've taken in the past, some of them are coming home to roost.
So I want to read you something to see if you agree or disagree. This is an opinion piece. It appeared in the Hartford Courant, and it's from a guy contributing. Well, I don't know who he is. A red Yankee, and he's works for a think tank, and he says the state's current fiscal environment is unexpectedly and deceptively stable. It is only a momentary calm before a long gathering storm,
Right.
ironically a storm that would have hit already, but for the Trump tax bill. Prepayment of the state and local taxes triggered by the tax bill's new
Correct.
cap on their deductibility accelerated as much as $450 million of future revenue
Right.
into the current budget.
Correct.
Repatriation of a huge trove of overseas profit has generated an estimated $765 million in state income taxes.
Right.
A huge one-time gusher.
Correct.
Is this essentially
Yeah, I mean,
sound,
basically, look, I'll defer to the writer, but yes, that's consistent with everything that
Okay.
I've talked about, and I think I'll just go back and I forget what word he used, but it's a one-time. There was someone he had a
One-time
more
gusher,
yeah,
or
one-time
something.
gusher. But the notion that I said that I mentioned earlier, with no net job growth in this state, we are going to remain in stagnation. And that to me is at the heart of this. And all the things we've been talking about here in this program is designed to keep the jobs that we have here today, encourage employers to be here, to add jobs here and recruit some businesses here. It's the long-term play.
So we got about 2 minutes for
Sure.
each of these three
All right.
questions. Would you veto, if you're governor,
Yeah.
would you veto a bill that the legislature passed that legalize recreational marijuana to get revenue into the general fund. That's the bill in front of
Correct.
you. You can't rewrite it.
I can't rewrite it, I'd veto it.
You'd veto that.
Because, yes, and just a little bit longer answer, but yes. The way
Yeah,
you structured that question, I would veto it.
And I did it on purpose because I
Correct.
think I'm generally aware that you want the taxes on legalized marijuana to be a special purpose fund
Correct.
for mental health and drug abuse.
Correct,
And those
absolutely. That is
But-
very well done,
But
Mike.
you'd veto it.
Correct.
Would you veto a bill that legalized online sports betting with the tax revenues went to the general fund?
Yes.
You'd veto that.
Veto it.
Yeah, would you
bear with me
veto
one
it?
second.
Because you can't rewrite that.
If I can't rewrite it,
You can't, no, not my hypothetical.
I don't. If I couldn't rewrite it, I don't know. I don't think I would veto it.
Okay. I'm not sure if legislative action is required, any sort of legislative action is required for a new super casino in Bridgeport, but I think some legislative action might be required. Would you veto a bill passed by the legislature that authorized a new super casino in Bridgeport?
I really would need to understand where we are with the tribes. If you don't know where we are with the tribes with the slots and that money.
Well, they wouldn't be happy about it.
Well, I think you might. Are you here's my narrative. Are you setting yourself up for a lawsuit that's never going to get resolved? That's my
Open question on that one.
Correct.
Ralph, your bottom line impression of.
I get to hear this directly.
Yeah,
Our
what we've
guest?
been,
Wow.
just everything.
Well,
yeah.
just real quickly, because I think I read this morning that the Quinnipiac poll had you at about 11%.
Exactly. We're headed in the right direction.
And to somehow go back to my Molotov cocktail and get to Mr. Griebel,
Sure.
Oz, which he prefers.
Yes, absolutely.
I think what you have, I mentioned the Molotov cocktail. Then you have Ned Lamont, who kind of knows he's running against the Molotov cocktail crowd and really is trying not to say anything that drives what are in his mind, learned, reasonable people over to that side. In other words, he's not talking tough measures. He's not talking about pain. And I think voters see through that too. And that's why, even before this is the first time I've met Oz, and I had heard a lot of positive vibe about him, and I can see why, because he's not part of the Molotov cocktail group, but he's also willing to say some things, to be straightforward. So I'm not surprised he's at 11%, and I think it is a good year for an independent candidate.
I think Ned Lamont's problem is that he's bending over backwards not to alienate labor, and therefore he's forced to be vague.
Right.
And therefore, it comes across to some people as maybe too Pablum-esque.
Wishy-washy. Excuse me, Mike.
Yeah, something like that.
Wishy-washy.
Stefanowski's proposal is just nuts. So we have Oz here.
That's the best alternative.
And,
we'll be on the bottom line, too.
Well, we're being a little playful, but deadly serious at the same time. The fear raised by Kevin Rennie and others, and I refer to Kevin Rennie in this show a lot. He's a former Republican legislator. Right. I think it makes a lot of sense in a lot of his columns. Or maybe this was Keith Phaneuf, is the bait and switch. Mm-hmm. Right. The bait and switch that Connecticut voters have fallen for maybe 20 years. That we can solve all your problems, taxes won't be raised, then they are. We can solve all your problems, Stefanowski says, with a tax cut. But a lot of these things just don't happen the way candidates during campaigns say they will. And Oz, that's why I pressed you about 35 minutes ago.
Sure.
How would you respond to that? This is all a bait and switch game until November 6th, and then the reality sets in, and all the candidates for governor change their mind.
The best thing I can say to both of you is that I've built a reputation in this state for 25 years as someone who is candid, a person of integrity, a person who can bring people together. And what I'm promising people is not the solution. What I'm promising people is the only way that we're going to leverage the significant strengths we have and address these problems is by working more collaboratively together. We've had 30 years of partisan politics, and one of you said this a minute ago. Can you imagine Bob Stefanowski getting a single Democrat to vote for a reduction, never mind the elimination of the personal income tax? Can you imagine Ned Lamont getting a single Republican to vote for a mandatory increase in the minimum wage by within the first year? What I've said all these times when you say, if you vote for Griebel Frank, I'm going to guarantee that Stefanowski gets elected, or if you vote for Griebel Frank, you're going to guarantee that Lamont's going to get elected. Here's my point. The center will hold in Connecticut the way it's held for 350 years. So those who fear that Bob Stefanowski is going to get elected, that Donald Trump's moving here on November 7th, it ain't going to happen. And anybody who's fearful that we're going to elect, that if Ned Lamont's elected, the unions are going to have more control than they have today, it ain't going to happen. What you elect in one of those two people is 4 more years of mediocrity, 4 more years of stagnation, 4 more years of no job growth, 4 more years of more people leaving the state for the wrong reasons. You elect us, we're bringing a breath of fresh air in. We're focusing on Connecticut residents, Connecticut taxpayers, and Connecticut employers. I know how simplistic that sounds, but it's a world of difference. And when people say, well, how are you going to govern when you know you're not going to be a member of either party? Pitch I say to this is that it's the easiest of all questions. When the electorate sends an independent ticket in, it'll send a shock to that building that it has never had before. And the moderates in both parties, and I believe there are moderates in both parties, will want to be part of that Big Ten focused on Connecticut residents.
Let's make that the final word.
Let's.
Good luck on the campaign
Thank you. I
trail.
appreciate the opportunity.
It was a lot of
Bob
fun.
and Ned show up at the show. I'd be curious.
We had Ned Lamont in June,
Oh, good.
by the way.
Good,
Yeah,
I'm glad.
yeah, right before we closed off for the summer. But good luck on the
Thank you.
campaign trail. We had a lot of fun. We enjoyed it.
I really appreciate the opportunity.
And we do appreciate it. And thanks for tuning in.
Amen.
We appreciate your watching the Citizen Mike Show. Remember, we're up on YouTube in a couple days, and Thursday nights on WPAA, 9 o'clock, Friday, 9 o'clock, Monday, Tuesday, and Wednesday, 9 o'clock. That's why we say if it's 9 at night, it's Citizen Mike. Good night, everybody.